Right, I'm here with Noi Mahoney, our Borderlands writer here at FreightWaves. Noi, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So, Noi, we're getting it kicked off with Mexico and their auto production. We saw a huge spike in August. What were some of the driving reasons behind that?
The automotive industry in Mexico has been struggling all year with, because of the same problems that a lot of supply chains around the world are struggling with, shortage of microconductor chips, semiconductor chips, and shortage of parts for vehicles. So they've been having a hard time with production all year. But August, most of the automakers in Mexico had a really good month. GM produced about 70,000 vehicles and exported about 65,000 vehicles. Toyota had a good month. Ford had a good month. Mercedes-Benz had a good month, which shows you that higher end luxury vehicles are also selling well right now. But a lot of the experts and people that are in Mexico said, they were a little cautious, saying that it could be an up and down year.
Right, and we know that there seems to have been kind of this general overall struggle with auto production, but at the same time, we know that Mexico has taken over as one of the U.S.'s top trade partners in recent months. Is their success in this auto production, and honestly the move from a lot of U.S. companies to move their production across the border, helping really drive that top trade partner?
Yes, absolutely. The U.S. and Mexico automotive production industry is so closely tied together that if something happens in the U.S., it affects, Mexican auto producers. And if something happens in Mexico, it affects, U.S. factories. So the fact that Mexico had a good month in August probably tells you that, things are slightly improving for U.S. factories in August as well.
And Noi, as you mentioned earlier, there's a specific outlook for that market for the remainder of the year, or really kind of going into 2023. It's not looking too bright. What are going to be some of the main reasons for some of that downturn that a lot of people are expecting?
It still comes down to semiconductor chips. A lot of the experts in Mexico said that, we're not out of the woods yet in terms of, the supply chain for chips. It's just, there's just such a vital component in so many things, including, cars and trucks, that when there's a shortage of that, it affects the entire supply chain of auto production.
So, Noi, with more and more U.S. companies choosing to move their auto production into Mexico, oftentimes it's to save a little bit of cost and to make things a little bit easier as far as saving on labor costs. But on the flip side, it really helps out the Mexican economy. What are people who are working down there, companies who are headquartered down there in Mexico, saying about how they're seeing kind of the labor market shake out, and if they're seeing this move across the border really help them out?
The labor market in Mexico is pretty strong right now, especially for the automotive industry. I think the government in Mexico and a lot of the trade associations are trying to do everything they can to attract as many factories, because they have the workers and they have the right, climate, government-wise, to make it attractive for these companies to put factories in Mexico. So the economy is ready for more in Mexico, I should say. They're ready for more factories. They want to get to work. They just want to have the supply chain ready so they don't have these work stoppages that keep happening because they run out of parts.
And Noi, that leads into my next question. It's really that infrastructure there in Mexico. When we look at the current situation, is there a significant amount of factories there right now to really make a huge difference? Or do you see this as an area that's really poised for more growth, for expansion, for more factories?
A little bit of both. Mexico has a huge concentration of auto factories already in the country, especially in a region called Bajío, which is a sort of central Mexico. That's sort of the automotive cluster, if you will, of one of the biggest automotive clusters in the country. But there is always room for more. I know the Bajío region, the government in that area is still trying to attract even more factories and facilities, and also the area around Monterrey, Mexico, which is one of the closest, largest northern cities in Mexico to the U.S.-Mexico border. which is also quite a big automotive cluster in the country. So there is a lot there already, but there's a lot of room for growth as well.
And Noi, this is kind of a more pointed, specific question, but I want to focus in a little bit specifically on Texas. Obviously, Texas is the state that shares the largest border with Mexico, so they have the most border crossings and they have the most opportunity to see that cross-border movement. How big of a player is Texas and these companies who are maybe setting up shop along that I-35 corridor, just south of Dallas, that is, outside of San Antonio, in Austin? How big of a role are they playing in what's coming across the border right now from an automotive standpoint?
It's growing quite rapidly. What was it, 15, 20 years ago, we got Toyota here in San Antonio, which was a huge deal. And, whenever you build a large auto factory, you get, tier one suppliers, you get all the other things that come with big factories. And in recent years, was it a year or two ago, we got Tesla in Austin. So you're starting to see more and more major automotive manufacturers find their way to Texas, and it's because of what you said. We're so close to Mexico. San Antonio is 150 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. Austin is just up the road. It's about 80 miles north of San Antonio, and we're both along I-35. So I only see more and more growth along the I-35 corridor, especially in south central Texas.
And Noi, as you mentioned earlier, part of that downward movement that's expected in the coming year or so is going to be around semiconductors and other components within the supply chain. Have you heard anything about what consumer demand might look like or what it's expected to look like for automotive vehicles? Is this still something that people are expecting to have a high demand from consumers, or are there any worries around that either?
I think there's going to be the manufacturers expect high demand, especially for electric vehicles, EV. You see manufacturers such as Ford, Chevy moving almost exclusively to electric vehicles, or almost all. Most of their lines are becoming electric, and so that's where they see the market moving. And more and more factories in Mexico are being retooled just to produce electric vehicles. And of course, you have Tesla, which is one of the biggest electric vehicle producers in the world, right here in Texas. So I think the major manufacturers see the market moving that way, in about 5 to 10 years.
I think that's a really good point. And the last question for you, Noi, you mentioned some of those luxury manufacturers who are really starting to see this uptick too. Could we be seeing maybe more of a shift from luxury producers who were making things here in the U.S. across the border, kind of following those initial people who moved?
Yeah, one of the little interesting tidbits I wrote in my column on Sunday was Mercedes-Benz recorded a 223 jump in production in the month of August. And it was only about 10,000 vehicles, but for them, that's a huge number of vehicles in 1 month. And they exported about 8,500 vehicles, and most of it was here to the US or Canada. And I just thought it was interesting that you have, high luxury vehicles that are selling well right now, I guess, which tells you the strength of the economy, or, wealthier people still have money to spend. And I think that speaks well of, for most of the luxury lines, there's people out there that have money to spend on these luxury vehicles. And that tells you that the economy might not be quite as bad off as we thought it was.
Well, awesome, Noi. Thanks so much for joining us for this segment. We'll definitely be watching Mexico closely. I'm excited about this expected growth here.
Thank you so much.
Anthony, do you agree with that? People spending money on luxury cars, maybe the economy's not in that bad of a shape?
Oh, I'm concerned about it because we're seeing more debt kind of accumulate, and consumers, I think, are on really shaky ground. So I'm a little bit concerned about them.
Maybe that's a topic for a future economy lately. Is the luxury life just a false god?
It is. Ooh. Yes.
Ooh, okay.
It is indeed. I like that idea.
All right, we're going to head back over to the carrier wall. We've got our next update from Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert.